What if belly fat doesn't disappear because the body isn't allowed to let it go? Not because discipline is lacking, not because you're not training hard enough, not because calories aren't being strictly controlled, but because the metabolism receives a signal that says energy is uncertain, storing is safer. Every year, millions of people try to lose their belly fat. They eat less, train harder, cut out sugar, try new diets, and yet this particular fat, especially around the abdomen, remains surprisingly stubborn. Why does one person visibly lose visceral fat, while another seems to do everything right and still sees no change? The answer is not willpower, it's not a secret superfood, and it's not a magical workout plan either. It lies in three silent biological forces that make decisions in the background every day: insulin, cortisol, and the way the body chooses which fuel to burn. The human body does not burn fat on command. It does not respond to pressure. It responds to signals. And fat is only released when it becomes metabolically necessary, not when it is aesthetically desired. In this analysis, step by step, you will see what happens in the first hours after a meal, when glycogen stores are depleted, when insulin actually drops, and at what moment stored belly fat truly becomes accessible. Because the decisive turning point is not at the beginning of a diet. It occurs when biological signals reorganize. And that is exactly where real fat burning begins.
Belly fat is not merely an aesthetic issue. Particularly so-called visceral fat, the fat stored deep in the abdominal cavity around the organs, is metabolically active. It produces inflammatory messengers, influences insulin sensitivity, and is closely linked to type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and fatty liver. Estimates show that in Western industrialized nations, a significant portion of adults exhibits some form of metabolic dysregulation, often without realizing it. The problem does not begin overnight. It develops slowly over years, through constantly elevated insulin levels, chronic stress, and a persistent reliance on rapidly available energy. To understand why belly fat is especially stubborn, a fundamental biological truth must be accepted. The human body follows a strict hierarchy of energy use. It does not burn what we want to get rid of. It burns what is available first. Immediately after a meal, blood sugar rises. Insulin is released to transport glucose into cells. As long as glucose is present in the bloodstream, the body has no reason to tap into stored energy. Why would it open reserves if quick energy is already circulating? If no new food is consumed, after several hours, the body begins to draw on stored glycogen, primarily from the liver and muscles. This glycogen is simply stored glucose. Even here, fat remains untouched. Only when glycogen stores significantly decline and insulin drops sufficiently does the metabolic signal shift. The body begins to increase the release of fatty acids. Yet even then, dietary fat is preferentially burned first if still available. Stored belly fat is the last strategic reserve. It is mobilized only when faster energy sources are no longer prioritized. This process is not a flaw of the body. It is a survival mechanism. For hundreds of thousands of years, storing energy protected against famine. The metabolism was programmed to prioritize safety over leanness. And this is where modern dieting is often misunderstood. Many try to burn fat while insulin remains high. They train intensely while cortisol rises. They eat frequent small meals and thereby prevent the body from ever reaching a state of low insulin. The result is frustration. Energy is burned, but not from the reserves that are meant to be reduced. Before considering solutions, the real question must be asked: which signals are holding on to belly fat, even when effort is present? In the next section, 3 silent forces are analyzed that determine whether fat is stored or released.
The first silent force is chronically elevated insulin. Insulin is not a bad hormone. On the contrary, it is essential for survival. Every time food is consumed, especially carbohydrates, insulin rises to transport glucose from the blood into the cells. Without insulin, energy would not be usable. The problem is not insulin itself, but its constant presence. When insulin rarely truly drops due to constant snacking, refined carbohydrates, or high sugar intake, the body remains in a metabolic state that blocks fat release. Insulin sends a clear signal: energy is available, reserves do not need to be opened. Under these conditions, the body may burn calories, but it prioritizes glucose and glycogen. Stored belly fat remains locked. At the same time, hunger paradoxically increases because access to the body's largest energy reserve is blocked. Energy is stored, but metabolically inaccessible. The second force is chronically elevated cortisol. Cortisol is the central stress hormone. In acute danger, it mobilizes energy, raises blood sugar, and ensures the brain is quickly supplied. Evolutionarily, this was vital. Modern threats, however, are rarely physical. They consist of sleep deprivation, constant time pressure, financial insecurity, and continuous digital stimulation. When cortisol remains chronically elevated, the body enters a biological alarm state. In this state, quick energy is prioritized, glucose is favored, fat burning is inhibited. At the same time, cortisol increases cravings for sugar and indirectly raises insulin. Visceral fat is particularly responsive to this hormonal environment. It serves as a rapidly accessible emergency reserve. Evening cravings, therefore, are rarely a moral failure. They are often hormonal communication. The third force is metabolic dependence on carbohydrates. A body that has been primarily fueled by sugar and starch for years becomes extremely efficient at burning glucose and inefficient at burning fat. This adaptation is not a defect, it is learning. But when such a metabolism suddenly receives fewer carbohydrates, it interprets this as a threat. Instead of calmly switching to fat, symptoms such as fatigue, irritability, dizziness, or difficulty concentration arise. Many quit at this point and believe their body doesn't function with fewer carbohydrates. In reality, fat burning was never trained. These three forces, insulin, cortisol, and carbohydrate dependence, do not act in isolation, they reinforce one another. Stress increases cortisol. Cortisol raises blood sugar. Elevated blood sugar stimulates insulin, and insulin keeps fat reserves closed. Thus, a cycle emerges in which belly fat is not the problem, but the logical consequence of certain metabolic signals. The decisive turning point does not begin with more discipline. It begins with a new understanding. The body is not sabotaging, it is protecting based on the signals it receives. In the next section, it will be precisely explained in what order the body uses energy sources and why stored belly fat always remains the last strategic reserve.
To truly understand when belly fat disappears, an uncomfortable but clear biological reality must be accepted. The body follows a fixed energy hierarchy. It does not burn what is aesthetically undesirable. It burns what is strategically available first. Immediately after a meal, especially after carbohydrates, blood sugar rises. Within minutes, the pancreas responds by releasing insulin. Glucose is transported into muscle and liver cells. As long as this process is active, stored fat remains locked. Approximately 0 to 4 hours after eating, the body is in the so-called absorptive state. Energy is abundant. Fat burning is metabolically unnecessary. Even intense training during this phase primarily relies on glucose. After about 4 to 8 hours without further food intake, blood sugar begins to decline. The body now turns to glycogen, the stored form of glucose in the liver and muscles. This supply is limited. Depending on activity level, it lasts approximately 12 to 24 hours. At this point, many people believe they are already burning body fat. In reality, stored glycogen is usually still being used. This explains why short-term diets often show rapid weight changes, primarily due to glycogen and water loss. 1 gram of glycogen binds several grams of water. The scale drops, but belly fat often remains unchanged. Only when glycogen stores are significantly depleted and insulin has dropped substantially does the true metabolic shift begin, the so-called metabolic switch. Neuroscientist Mark Mattson described this transition as a central mechanism of metabolic flexibility. In this state, the body increases lipolysis, the release of fatty acids from adipose tissue. Now, a crucial difference emerges. The body begins to truly mobilize stored energy. Approximately 12 to 16 hours after the last meal, depending on individual insulin sensitivity, fat burning measurably increases. At the same time, the liver begins producing ketone bodies. These serve as an alternative energy source for the brain. The signal shifts from store energy to provide energy. After 24 hours, this process intensifies. Growth hormone rises, not by coincidence, but as a protective mechanism to preserve muscle mass. Insulin remains low. Fat release increases. The body is now in a state that is evolutionarily familiar, temporary food scarcity. For hundreds of thousands of years, this state was normal. Human metabolism did not evolve for constant food availability, but for cycles of feeding and fasting. Metabolic flexibility was a survival advantage. In the modern environment, however, this switch often never occurs. Constant meals, snacks, and sugar-sweetened beverages prevent insulin from ever dropping sufficiently. The body remains permanently in fast energy mode. Fat stays a reserve, and reserves are not opened unless necessary. Here lies the central point. No workout, no superfood, and no single strategy can skip this biological sequence.
Stored belly fat is only used when faster energy sources are no longer prioritized and hormonal signals, particularly insulin, allow access. Fat loss is therefore not an act of aggression against the body. It is the result of correctly set signals. In the next section, it will be shown how these signals can be deliberately reorganized, not through extreme measures, but through a coordinated system that lowers insulin, reduces stress, and restores metabolic flexibility.
Once it is clear that fat burning is not random, but a hormonally controlled decision of the body, a logical question arises. How can these signals be consciously organized? Not through extremes, not through self-punishment, but through structure. The first lever is insulin control. This does not mean no carbohydrates, but fewer insulin spikes. Highly processed sugar sources, liquid calories, and constant snacking keep insulin chronically elevated. Even small amounts, consumed frequently, prevent the metabolic switch. A simple yet effective strategy is extending eating gaps. A window of 12 to 16 hours without caloric intake can, depending on individual metabolic status, already be enough to significantly lower insulin. Consistency matters more than extremism. The second lever is muscle activity. Muscles are metabolically active tissue. They act like glucose sinks. Strength training not only increases energy expenditure, but improves insulin sensitivity. This means less insulin is required to process the same amount of glucose. In the long term, this facilitates access to fat reserves. Interestingly, resistance training combined with eating gaps is particularly effective. Light training toward the end of a fasting phase can reduce glycogen stores more quickly and accelerate the transition to fat burning, not through force, but through physiological logic. The third lever is stress regulation. Chronic stress increases cortisol. In the short term, cortisol mobilizes energy, but in the long term, it promotes fat storage, especially in the abdominal area. The body interprets persistent stress as threat. In such a state, energy storage is protective. Sleep plays a decisive role here. Less than 6 hours of sleep per night has been shown to increase hunger hormones such as ghrelin and reduce leptin, the satiety signal. At the same time, insulin sensitivity worsens. The result, more hunger, poorer fat burning. Without adequate recovery, metabolism works against your goals. Another underestimated factor is protein intake. Protein stabilizes blood sugar, increases satiety, and protects muscle mass during a calorie deficit. Preserving muscle is crucial. The more lean mass is maintained, the higher the resting metabolic rate remains. Many diets fail not because of willpower, but because of flawed strategy. They drastically reduce calories while simultaneously lowering metabolic rate, increasing stress, and disrupting hormonal balance. Short-term weight loss is purchased at the cost of long-term metabolic slowdown. The body is not an enemy. It responds logically to the environment. When eating gaps are structured, insulin spikes reduced, muscle activity increased, and stress controlled, an environment is created in which fat release is not forced, but permitted. Belly fat does not disappear overnight, but when signals are correct, it becomes metabolically increasingly impractical for the body to keep it. In the next section, it will be clarified why many people stagnate despite exercise and seemingly healthy nutrition, and which hidden factors can block progress.
Many people train regularly. They seemingly pay attention to their nutrition, and yet belly fat hardly changes. This phenomenon is not a sign of a bad metabolism or genetic misfortune. In most cases, invisible barriers exist. One of the most common is chronic low-grade inflammation. Visceral belly fat, the fat around internal organs, is hormonally active. It produces pro-inflammatory messengers. These in turn impair insulin sensitivity. A vicious cycle develops. More insulin resistance leads to higher insulin levels. Higher insulin levels block fat release. A second barrier is metabolic inflexibility. If the body has relied predominantly on glucose as an energy source for years, through frequent meals, high sugar intake, and constant insulin activity, it essentially forgets how to efficiently switch to fat burning. The transition takes longer. Adaptation is sluggish. During this phase, many people feel low energy when extending eating gaps and quit before adaptation is complete. But flexibility can be trained, just like a muscle. Another critical factor is hidden calorie intake. Liquid calories, juices, smoothies, coffee drinks are metabolized differently than solid food. They provide less satiety, but still raise insulin. Even small, frequent amounts can unknowingly interrupt the fasting state. Even healthy snacks are often problematic when consumed frequently. Metabolism needs phases of low insulin activity. Without these phases, fat mobilization remains minimal. Then there is the adaptation effect. When the body remains in a calorie deficit for an extended period, it adapts. Resting metabolic rate decreases. Spontaneous daily movement, NEAT, unconsciously declines. You sit a little more, move a little less. This reduction can amount to several hundred calories per day without conscious awareness. The result, the originally effective deficit, no longer exists. An often overlooked factor is gut health. Changes in the microbiome can influence inflammation levels, nutrient utilization, and hunger regulation. Sleep deprivation, highly processed food, and chronic stress directly affect the system. Finally, expectation management plays a role. Belly fat, particularly visceral fat, responds sensitively to hormonal changes, but it rarely disappears first. The body decides from which depots it mobilizes energy. Spot reduction through targeted exercises is a myth. Ab training strengthens muscle, but not selectively the fat above it. This does not mean progress is absent. It means progress is systemic, not local. When insulin remains chronically low, muscle mass is preserved, stress is reduced, and metabolic flexibility is trained, the hormonal landscape gradually shifts. In this new environment, belly fat loses its strategic priority. In the next section, everything will be brought together into a clear, actionable sequence, a structured protocol translating these principles into a practical weekly routine.
Theory is worthless without implementation. Therefore, everything is now translated into a clear, realistic system, not an extreme program, but a metabolically logical weekly model. Step 1. Structured eating windows. Begin with a 12-hour window. For example, last meal at 7 p.m., first meal at 7 a.m. After 1 to 2 weeks, this window can gradually be extended to 14 or 16 hours, provided energy levels and sleep remain stable. No force, no sudden 20-hour fasting experiments. Important, during the fasting phase, no calories, no juice, no milk in coffee, no small snacks, water, unsweetened tea, black coffee, that's it. The goal is a clear insulin drop. Step 2. Protein prioritization. Each main meal should contain a clear protein source. This protects muscle mass and stabilizes blood sugar. A rough guideline is about 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, adjusted for activity level. Muscle mass is metabolic capital. It must not be sacrificed. Step 3. Strength training as the anchor. 2 to 4 sessions per week. Focus on large muscle groups, legs, back, chest. Compound movements instead of isolated exercises. The goal is not calorie burn during training, but long-term improvement in insulin sensitivity and preservation of lean mass. Optional, light training or brisk walking toward the end of the fasting phase can support the transition to fat burning, but intensity is secondary to consistency. Step 4. Carbohydrate timing. Carbohydrates are not the enemy, but their timing influences insulin. For many people, it makes sense to consume larger amounts of carbohydrates after training or in the evening, when muscles are receptive. This improves nutrient partitioning, more energy into muscle cells, less into fat stores. Step 5. Sleep as a requirement, not a bonus. 7 to 9 hours per night, dark room, consistent sleep schedule, no screen light shortly before bed. Poor sleep increases hunger hormones, worsens insulin sensitivity, and raises stress. Without sleep, there is no sustainable fat loss. Step 6. Stress control. Daily short relaxation phases, breathing exercises, walks, intentional mental breaks. Chronically elevated cortisol signals uncertainty to the body. Uncertainty promotes storage, not release. Step 7. Patience and measurement system. Do not weigh yourself daily. 2 to 3 times per week is sufficient. Additionally, measure waist circumference. Belly fat often responds with delay, but visibly over weeks. Focus on trends, not individual days. Realistic expectation, 0.5 to 1% of body weight per week as a sustainable range. Faster losses are usually water or muscle mass. The decisive factor, this protocol does not force the body. It creates conditions under which fat burning becomes metabolically logical. After 3 to 4 weeks, many people begin to notice changes, more stable energy, fewer cravings, clearer thinking. These are signs of growing metabolic flexibility. Belly fat does not disappear through motivation. It disappears through repeated, correct signals. In the concluding section, the overall picture will be summarized once more and clearly answer what extremely fast truly means in a biological context.
Extremely fast sells well. It sounds like a shortcut, a breakthrough, an immediate transformation. But biology does not operate on marketing time. Fat loss is not an event. It is an adaptation. When hormonal signals are correctly set, insulin regularly low, muscle mass preserved, stress controlled, sleep stable, the body begins to prioritize energy differently, not overnight, but gradually. In the first 7 to 10 days, internal changes usually occur. Glycogen stores normalize, water weight fluctuates, cravings decrease. Many misinterpret this phase, either as huge success or as stagnation. Actual fat reduction often becomes visible from week 2 to 4. Visceral belly fat, in particular, responds sensitively to improved insulin sensitivity. Studies show that even moderate weight reductions of 5 to 10% can produce significant metabolic improvements, even if outward appearance changes only slightly. That is the decisive point. Health improvement begins earlier than aesthetic perfection. Extremely fast does not biologically mean days. It means faster than chronic stagnation, faster than years of dieting without system, faster than permanent calorie counting without hormonal understanding. When the system is correct, belly fat can be measurably reduced within a few weeks, not through magic, but through metabolic logic. And perhaps that is the most important realization. The body is not an enemy that must be defeated. It is a system that wants to be understood. Those who respect the signals do not need radical methods, no forbidden foods, no endless cardio marathons, just structure, consistency, patience. It is not a spectacular solution, but it is a scientifically stable one. And that is exactly why it works.